The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. Dad was gone massive heart attack in his sleep, the kind that takes you before you can say goodbye, or sorry, or any of the thousand things left unsaid between fathers and daughters who love each other but struggle to understand. I stared at my phone in the darkness of my Denver apartment, Vera's voice still echoing. He's gone, Tamsin, just gone. At 32, I thought I had more time to repair the fractures in our relationship, more opportunities to prove I wasn't the selfish, ungrateful daughter he sometimes accused me of being during our heated arguments about family loyalty. Those arguments always centered on the same theme: my reluctance to financially support family members who, in his words, just needed a helping hand. I'd pushed back, pointing out patterns of dependency that he either couldn't or wouldn't see. Blood is thicker than water, he'd say, his voice carrying disappointment that cut deeper than anger. Now sitting in my marketing manager's salary comfort zone, I was drowning in guilt. The last conversation we'd had was an argument about Callista's wedding expenses. I'd refused to contribute to what I saw as an overblown celebration. Dad called me cold. I called him blind. We hung up on each other, and neither of us called back. 3 months later, he was dead, and I was holding the weight of words I couldn't take back. The funeral was a blur of casseroles and condolences, but one moment crystallized everything. Vera quietly mentioning to the funeral director that she wasn't sure how she'd manage Dad's final hospital bills. Her voice carried just the right note of brave resignation. "Don't worry about the bills," I told her as we sat in the funeral home's consultation room. "I'll handle them." The relief on her face was immediate. "Oh, Tamsin," she said, squeezing my hand. "Your father always said you had the biggest heart in the family. He'd be so proud." For the first time since that horrible phone call, I felt useful, necessary. Like maybe I could honor Dad's memory by being the daughter he'd always wanted, the one who showed up for family without question. The medical bills totaled $847. I paid them without hesitation, and for once, everyone looked at me with genuine gratitude. Callista actually hugged me. Declan shook my hand and called me a real lifesaver. Even little Leora colored me a thank you card. It felt like love. I should have known it was just the beginning. 6 months later, Vera called with another crisis. Leora needed emergency dental work, a root canal that insurance wouldn't cover. The remaining balance was $1,200. "I hate to ask," Vera said, her voice tight with embarrassment, "but Leora's in so much pain, and I just don't know where else to turn. It's temporary. Of course, I'll pay you back as soon as I can." The temporary should have been a red flag. So should the fact that this was the first time Vera had called me directly since the funeral. But all I heard was a child in pain and a grandmother who needed help. Dad would have wanted me to step up. I transferred the money that afternoon. A year later, it was Leora's private school tuition. The public school was going downhill, and Callista was worried sick about Leora's education. The private school was only $800 a month. Surely I could help, just until Vera found something better paying. Then came the house. Callista and Declan had found their dream home, but needed a co-signer. Their credit was still recovering from youthful mistakes with credit cards. "You'd really be helping us build our future," Callista said over dinner at an expensive restaurant where the check was placed directly in front of me. "It's not like you'd be responsible for payments. We just need someone with good credit to vouch for us." I signed the papers on Thursday. By Friday, they were planning a housewarming party. 2 years later came the wedding, $45,000 for Callista's Pinterest-perfect celebration. Their budget was only $28,000. "We're family," Vera said during Sunday dinner at their new house, the one I'd helped them qualify for. Your father always said you were the most financially responsible one. He'd want you to be part of making Callista's dreams come true. I wrote a check for $25,000, telling myself it was an investment in family harmony. The wedding was beautiful. During the reception, Callista gave a tearful speech thanking everyone who had made this magical day possible. She thanked the wedding planner, Declan's parents, Vera, their friends who traveled to celebrate. She never mentioned my name. When I brought it up later, Vera looked at me with disappointment. Making a big deal about money at someone's wedding? That's not appropriate. Your father always worried you were too sensitive about recognition. The word sensitive hit like a slap. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe real generosity meant giving without expectation. I apologized and told myself to be better. It was the biggest mistake I ever made. By Leora's 16th birthday last year, I had become the family's unofficial financial safety net. The role was never acknowledged. It had evolved crisis by crisis until my involvement was simply assumed. Leora's Sweet 16 was Callista's idea, a small gathering that required renting a community center, hiring a DJ, catering for 60 people, professional photography, and a custom cake. I coordinated vendors and wrote checks totaling $4,200. You're so good at organizing these things, Callista told me. And honestly, you make more money than the rest of us. It just makes sense. The party was perfect. 3 days later, Callista posted a video montage with the caption, "Threw my baby girl the sweetest 16 celebration. So grateful I could pull off such a magical night for my daughter." According to Callista's version, she had single-handedly orchestrated everything. When I mentioned this to Vera, her response was swift. "Really, Tamsin? You need credit for everything. That's not what generosity looks like. Your father always worried about this the way you keep score with family." I started keeping notes after that, not to keep score, but to maintain grip on reality. My contributions were essential when needed, but invisible when credit was distributed. My presence was required for events, but optional for recognition. 3 months later, Vera called with what sounded like an olive branch. "I've been thinking we should plan a family vacation this summer. Somewhere beautiful where we can reconnect. What do you think about Destin?" The planning was already done, the house was booked, the activities were scheduled. My role would be limited to one function paying for everything. But this time, I would finally understand that my money was the only part of me they actually needed. The beach house was pristine, a white cottage steps from shore with wraparound porches. I arrived Thursday afternoon to laughter drifting from the back deck. Despite flying in specifically for our family bonding week, I was last to arrive. Vera met me with a perfunctory hug. "You made it," she said, as if my arrival was unexpected. Through the door, I could see Callista and Declan taking selfies on the deck. Vera led me to my room, technically a bedroom, but barely, tucked behind the kitchen with a single window facing the neighbor's AC unit. It contained a twin bed and just enough floor space to open a suitcase. "I know it's snug," Vera said, not meeting my eyes. "But the other rooms are set up, and I thought you'd appreciate the privacy." The master suite was spacious with French doors to the deck. The other bedrooms had ocean views and actual furniture. "This is fine," I said, because what else could I say? "On the deck," Callista called out. "Perfect timing. We were talking about tomorrow's dolphin tour." "Sounds perfect," I said, settling into the one remaining chair, slightly apart from the conversation circle. There was a loaded silence. Vera and Callista exchanged glances. "We actually already booked that," Callista said carefully. "The boat only takes 6 people, and with Declan's cousin joining us." She trailed off helplessly. "Declan's cousin. He just left for work, but we'd included him when we booked." Declan explained, They'd planned an activity that excluded me while counting someone staying one night. That's okay. I forced a smile. I can explore on my own. You're so understanding, Vera said. I knew you wouldn't mind. You've always been so independent. That evening, I checked my email and found something confusing. I'd transferred $2,800 to Vera for vacation rental and activities, but my credit card showed a $450 charge for Emerald Coast Dolphin Adventures 3 days ago. I'd paid for a tour I wasn't invited to join. The next evening at Harbor Docks, conversation flowed around topics I had no context for, inside jokes from the boat tour, plans for activities, discussions of experiences I hadn't shared. When our server brought the check, it was placed directly in front of me with automatic assumption. Tamsin's got this one, Callista announced cheerfully, loud enough for nearby tables. She always does, Leora clapped. Auntie Tamsin pays for everything. Nearby diners turned to look with amused smiles. Heat rose in my cheeks as I processed my 16-year-old niece's casual announcement of my role as family ATM. You're always so generous, Vera added, but her tone lacked warmth, polite but distant, acknowledging a transaction rather than expressing gratitude. Back at the house, I opened my banking app. The Dolphin tour charge was there, processed to my backup card, the one I'd given Vera for emergencies only. I found other charges, $127 for groceries, $89 for beach gear rental, $156 for sailing adventures, all charged without my knowledge. I was funding a vacation I wasn't fully invited to participate in. The next afternoon, I offered to help with dinner preparation, a chance to contribute something other than money. While slicing vegetables in the kitchen, voices from the front porch drifted clearly through the open window. She's always been sensitive, Vera was saying to a neighbor who'd stopped by. We've tried everything, but she seems to see slights and drama where none exist. I remember her graduation, Callista chimed in. She actually cried because her name wasn't on a banner we made. She made the whole day about herself instead of celebrating. I paused mid-slice. Callista's story bore no resemblance to reality. At my graduation, there had been a banner listing all recent graduates in our friend group, everyone's name except mine. When I'd quietly mentioned the omission, Vera had brushed it off. We don't need a banner to prove we're proud. I reached for my phone and opened voice memo, tapping record. Drama seems to follow her. Vera continued philosophically. We keep hoping she'll grow out of it. The hardest part, Callista added, is that she's so generous with money, which makes it difficult to address the emotional stuff. How do you tell someone they're being dramatic when they're also paying for half your expenses? There, it was acknowledgement that my contributions were significant, coupled with the implication that my money disqualified me from having legitimate emotional responses. When the conversation shifted, I stopped recording. My hands shook slightly as I saved the file. For years, I'd wondered if I was actually too sensitive. But listening to them casually distort truth while I stood 10 feet away, I realized my instincts had been accurate. They weren't just failing to appreciate my contributions. They were actively rewriting history to position themselves as patient family members dealing with a problematic relative who happened to be useful for bills. Friday morning brought discussion of evening concert logistics, transportation, and seating for 5 people. This was supposed to be the highlight a concert I'd suggested, researched, and purchased 6 tickets for at $140 each. What time should we leave? I asked, trying to insert myself naturally. Sharp silence followed. Everyone found fascinating things to stare at: phones, coffee mugs, anything but my face. Oh, sweetheart, Vera began gently. We thought you weren't really interested anymore. You've seemed so distant this week. Not interested in the concert I suggested and bought tickets for. We gave your ticket to Marie's neighbor's son, Callista said brightly. He's such a huge fan, and when we mentioned we had an extra ticket, I repeated slowly. You gave away my ticket to a stranger. I opened my phone, scrolling to April's emails. Here, I said, showing the confirmation. 6 tickets, purchased by me, charged to my card, for a concert I specifically requested. No one looked at the screen. Vera sighed patiently. Of course you bought them. You handle those details. But paying doesn't mean you're locked into participating if your feelings change. My feelings haven't changed. I've been looking forward to this for months. But you've been so withdrawn, Callista added. Yesterday you stayed behind instead of joining beach games. We honestly thought you'd prefer quiet time. I stared, trying to understand how one afternoon of reading had been interpreted as complete disinterest in all activities. You could have asked me. We're asking now, Vera replied reasonably. Do you want to go? I'm sure we can work something out with Tyler's family. Even if they retrieved the ticket, I'd be attending a concert where my presence was an afterthought, arguing for the right to participate in an event I'd organized and funded. No, I said quietly. Don't worry about it. See, Callista said brightly. I told you she wasn't really interested. I returned to my room and changed my flight from Sunday to Saturday morning. Then I began calculating exactly how much this family vacation had cost me and how many expenses had been incurred without my knowledge. Saturday morning arrived with false cheerfulness as everyone pretended nothing uncomfortable had happened. I'd spent Friday evening reading while they attended the concert I'd purchased, and no one mentioned my absence when they returned laughing and drunk. Over breakfast, they eagerly shared highlights from the evening I'd been excluded from, as if including me in the recap could compensate for excluding me from the event. The opening act was incredible, Leora gushed. They did this acoustic version that was better than the original. And the headliners played for almost 3 hours, Declan added enthusiastically. I made appropriate sounds while calculating that I'd paid $140 each for them to have the time of their lives while I sat alone. That's when Callista produced her surprise, a professionally bound photo album that looked expensive. I had this made while we were here, she announced proudly. All our favorite moments from the week, so we'll always remember this amazing time. The album was beautiful leather-bound with Jennings Family Beach Week 2024 embossed in gold. They flipped through pages together, narrating each moment like beloved family legend. Beach walks, sunset dinners, dolphin tours, morning coffee rituals. I appeared in exactly 3 photographs. The first showed me in the background, barely visible behind Vera and Leora, building a sandcastle I'd helped engineer. The second captured me carrying beach chairs and towels, face obscured by equipment while everyone else walked unencumbered. The third photo stopped my breath entirely. It was our group shot from harbor docks, everyone raising glasses in a toast, faces glowing with golden hour lighting. I was clearly the one taking the picture, evidenced by the distance and angle. But underneath, in Callista's careful handwriting, unidentified guest joins our family celebration, LOL. Unidentified guest. I stared at the caption, reading twice. They were all admiring the photo, reminiscing about that perfect evening, seemingly unaware that I'd been labeled a stranger in my own family album. That was such a perfect night, Vera said, running her finger along the photo's edge. No one commented on the caption. No one seemed to notice I'd been identified as an unidentified guest in a photo from a dinner I'd paid for. Later that morning, resort staff approached me with a clipboard. Excuse me, are you one of the housekeeping staff? The Jennings family mentioned you'd be around the property this week. I looked up from my book. I'm sorry. The housekeeping. We're coordinating schedules so we don't disturb cleaning staff. They told resort staff I was hired help, not a relative, not a guest housekeeping staff who would be around for the week. No, I said steadily. I'm part of the Jennings family. His expression shifted to embarrassed concern. Oh, I'm sorry. There must have been miscommunication. Yes, after he hurried away, I sat staring at the ocean. They hadn't just erased me from photos and excluded me from activities. They'd actively told strangers I was service staff rather than family. I was invisible for credit, but when my existence required explanation, I became hired help rather than a relative worth acknowledging. That afternoon, I walked to the beach to process everything. After 30 minutes, I realized I'd left my phone and headed back. The house was quieter, Vera and Callista napping on the deck. No sign of others. I slipped in for my phone, which was on the kitchen counter beside Vera's open laptop. The screen showed an email inbox, and I couldn't help noticing my name in a subject line. I shouldn't have looked, but seeing my name in what was clearly recent correspondence made me pause. The message was from Richard Patterson, Reed Tamsin situation, estate planning consultation. Dated 3 days ago, before I could stop myself, I was reading. Vera, I understand your concerns about the current will structure. Your stepdaughter's inclusion in Mrs. Jennings' estate was based on her relationship with your late husband, but circumstances can change family dynamics. If you believe Tamsin has become disconnected and wouldn't be a responsible steward of inheritance, we can explore restructuring options. Your mother-in-law's mental state, while generally sound, can be presented as fluctuating due to age, giving grounds to suggest she may not understand current family relationships. The key is documentation. If you can provide evidence that Tamsin has become difficult or unreliable family conflicts, financial irresponsibility, concerning behavior, we can build a case for why Mrs. Jennings might reconsider beneficiary designations. Given that Tamsin lives well on her salary, one could argue she doesn't need inheritance like other family members. This is especially relevant with Leora starting college soon. I read twice, hands trembling. Vera was working to remove me from Dad's mother's will, using claims about my mental state to justify disinheriting me. The grandmother who'd always been kind was apparently being told I'd become problematic. But the most stunning part was suggesting my financial stability should disqualify me from inheritance. While family members depending on my support should be rewarded for neediness, I took screenshots, forwarding them to my personal email before deleting the sent message and closing the laptop. This wasn't family dysfunction or miscommunication. This was about money removing me as an obstacle to their access to more money. Every slight, every dismissal, every moment of being made to feel oversensitive was part of a documented pattern to support their legal case. I walked back outside, but this time I wasn't walking to clear my head. I was planning exactly how to respond to a family that had decided I was more valuable as a financial resource than a person, at least until they could access my money without dealing with me. That evening's dinner was meant to be our final family meal, a celebration of memories we'd created. Vera had prepared her signature dish, seafood pasta requiring ingredients I'd unknowingly paid for through mysterious grocery charges. The table was set with special care cloth napkins, battery candles, shell centerpiece. Everyone dressed nicer than usual, acknowledging this as a meaningful moment. But as I sat down, I felt the weight of everything I now knew pressing against my chest. The emails about removing me from the will, the casual labeling as housekeeping staff, the systematic documentation of my difficult behavior, it swirled into clarity that was both painful and liberating. I made it through appetizers, contributing appropriate responses about how quickly the week had passed. But when Vera suggested we each share our favorite memory, something inside me snapped. Before we do that, I said, setting down my fork carefully, I'd like to address something that's been bothering me. Sudden silence cut through ocean breeze. Vera's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. Is this really the time? Vera asked with familiar gentle disapproval. Actually, I think it's exactly the time, I replied, pulling out my phone and opening voice memo. Since we're sharing memories, you might be interested in this conversation I recorded yesterday. I pressed play. Vera's voice filled the room. She's always been sensitive. We've tried everything, but she seems to see slights and drama where none exist. The recording continued 30 seconds long enough for Callista's graduation story, Vera's commentary about drama following me, their casual discussion of my mental state for a neighbor's benefit. When it ended, no one spoke. Vera had gone pale. Callista stared at her plate. Interesting version of events, I said conversationally, especially the graduation part, since what actually happened was you forgot my name on the banner for my own celebration, but that doesn't fit your narrative about my manufactured drama. Tamsin, Declan started cautiously. I'm not finished, I continued, opening my email screenshots. Since we're being honest about family dynamics, you might also be interested in this correspondence I discovered on Vera's laptop. I read selected portions aloud, parts about my mental state, suggestions about manipulating my grandmother's understanding, casual dismissal of my inheritance rights because I didn't need it like other family members. The silence that followed was stunned quiet of people caught in betrayal they couldn't explain. You went through my private emails, Vera finally said. I saw my name in a subject line on your open laptop. Given everything else this week, I felt justified understanding what campaign you've been running behind my back. That's not what this is, Callista said quickly, but lacked conviction. You don't understand the full context. Then explain it. I interrupted. Explain how plotting to remove me from inheritance while using my money for family activities is in my best interest. Explain how telling resort staff I'm housekeeping rather than family is protective. Explain how labeling me unidentified guest in your photo album is innocent mistake. Each example landed like physical blows. These weren't isolated incidents, they were part of an indefensible pattern. We never meant to hurt you, Vera said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard. Everything we've done has been about maintaining family harmony. You have to understand how difficult it's been. Walking on eggshells around your sensitivity. Stop, I said firmly. Do not turn this into something I've done wrong. Do not make my reaction to your mistreatment into evidence that I'm the problem. I'm done with that manipulation. I stood from the table, dinner barely touched, looking around at faces that suddenly seemed like strangers. I want you to know that I heard every word of that recording. I saw every email in that thread. I have screenshots of unauthorized charges to my credit card, and I understand exactly how you view my role in this family. My voice was steady, controlled, completely unlike the emotional outbursts they'd trained me to expect. You're not my family, I continued. You're people who figured out how to monetize my need for belonging. As of right now, that arrangement is permanently terminated. I walked toward my room to pack, leaving behind people about to discover exactly how much their lifestyle had been subsidized by someone they'd systematically trained to distrust her own perceptions. The urgent, worried conversation starting behind me full of damage control attempts only confirmed I'd finally understood with perfect clarity. They weren't upset because they'd hurt me. They were upset because their financial resource was walking away. I packed with methodical precision, each folded item feeling like reclamation. While I organized belongings, I heard urgent conversations in other parts of the house, lowered but tense voices, fragments of damage control planning. But those were no longer my problems to solve. I opened my laptop and began the process I'd been mentally rehearsing. One by one, I logged into every shared account with my name or payment information. First, the family credit card I'd co-signed during Callista and Declan's housing crisis, which had evolved into general purpose funding for their expenses. Status changed from active to permanently frozen. No reactivation possible without all original cardholders present. Next, the grocery delivery service I'd been paying for since setting it up for Vera's convenience. Account closed. Final delivery canceled. Streaming services I'd added family members to over the years. Netflix, Hulu, Spotify, premium cable with sports channels for Declan. Every family member removed. Accounts returned to single-user status. Vera's Uber account, connected to my payment method after her car trouble last year. Payment information deleted. The shared Google Drive folders where I'd organized family photos. Vacation planning. Financial spreadsheets tracking my contributions. Access revoked for all users except myself. Each click felt like removing another thread from a web carefully constructed to ensure my money could be accessed without my ongoing consent. I wasn't being vindictive, simply returning ownership of my financial resources to myself. The process took 47 minutes. By the time I closed my laptop, every automatic payment, shared account, and financial connection had been severed. My phone buzzed with a text from Callista. "Can we talk? I think there are misunderstandings we need to clear up." I deleted the message without responding and enabled Do Not Disturb. There were no misunderstandings left to clear up. I left before dawn, wheeling my suitcase across Shell Driveway while the house slept. My rental car started quietly, and I drove toward the airport without looking back. By the time my plane lifted off, the systematic shutdown was creating real-world consequences for the people I'd left behind. Vera discovered the first problem checking out of the beach house. The credit card on file was declined. She tried again, still declined. While she dealt with that confusion, Callista attempted ordering groceries using the delivery service that had been reliably available all week. Access denied. Account not found. Customer service informed her the account had been closed by the primary user. Declan's rental car payment, automatically charged to my backup card, failed to process. The rental company sent notification they needed updated payment within 4 hours or would report the vehicle stolen. By 10 a.m., my phone vibrated constantly with increasingly frantic messages. "Tamsin, the credit card isn't working. Can you call the bank? Vera, something's wrong with all the accounts. We can't get groceries or pay for anything." Callista, "This is ridiculous. We're stuck here without transportation. Fix this now." Callista, I read each message as it arrived but didn't respond. I was 30,000 feet above Georgia, drinking coffee I'd paid for with my own money, on a flight I'd booked with my own credit card, heading toward a life where my financial decisions would benefit exactly one person, me. Messages escalated throughout the day as the full scope of their dependency became apparent. Streaming services stopped working. Shared photo storage became inaccessible. Even the family group chat I'd set up and administered was no longer available. "You're being incredibly petty. This isn't just hurting us, you're hurting Leora too." But I wasn't hurting anyone. I was simply no longer subsidizing their lifestyle while accepting emotional abuse in return. By evening, when I was safely back in my Denver apartment, message tone had shifted from demanding to pleading to threatening and back to pleading. They'd spent an entire day navigating basic challenges without access to my money. And the experience had been educational. The last message before I blocked all numbers came from Vera. "Your father would be ashamed of the person you've become." I stared at that text. feeling the familiar guilt stab that usually accompanied invocations of Dad's memory. But this time, instead of the usual spiral of self-doubt, I felt something different: anger. Dad would be ashamed. All right, but not of me. The first week back in Denver was disorienting the way major life changes always are, even positive ones. I kept expecting my phone to buzz with family drama, kept automatically calculating whether I could afford expenses before remembering the only expenses I needed to consider were my own. My apartment felt different, quieter, more peaceful, but also unnervingly empty. For years, I'd been so focused on managing family relationships and financial obligations that I'd forgotten what it felt like to have mental space for my own thoughts. Thursday morning, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost sent it to voicemail, but something made me answer. Tamsin, this is Grandma Jennings. I hope it's all right that I'm calling. Dad's mother, the grandmother Vera had been trying to turn against me through carefully constructed stories about my mental state. Of course it's all right, I said, settling into my favorite chair. It's wonderful to hear from you. I've been having very concerning conversations with Vera this week, she said, her voice growing stronger. She's been telling me you've been having some kind of breakdown, that you've cut off contact and stolen money from them. But none of that sounds like the granddaughter I know. I took a deep breath and decided honesty was the only option. Grandma, I need to tell you about some things that have been happening. It might be difficult to hear. Over 45 minutes, I explained everything: the systematic financial exploitation, the gaslighting about my sensitivity, the emails about removing me from her will, the vacation where I'd been treated like hired help while funding everyone else's good time. Grandma listened without interruption, occasionally making sounds of distress or anger. When I finished, there was a long pause. That child, she said finally, and I could hear steel in her voice that Dad had always spoken of with admiration. She's been lying to me for months. She's been calling regularly, telling me you'd become distant and unreliable, that you were having financial problems and might try to manipulate me for money. My chest tightened. She told you I was having financial problems. She said you'd been asking family members for loans and getting angry when they couldn't help. She made it sound like you were spiraling and might need professional help. Grandma's voice was sharp with anger. I've been so worried about you, wondering why you'd stopped calling as often. The systematic nature of the campaign was staggering. Vera hadn't just been building a legal case. She'd been poisoning my relationship with the one family member who genuinely cared about me. I'm financially stable, Grandma, I said quietly. More stable than ever, actually, now that I'm not supporting people who don't appreciate it. I'm calling my lawyer tomorrow, she said firmly. And I'm having a very serious conversation with Vera about the lies she's been telling. No one manipulates me or my family. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and cried for the first time since leaving Destin. Not from sadness, but from relief. Someone who mattered had heard the truth and believed it. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't too sensitive. I wasn't the problem. For the first time in years, I was free. The second week was harder. Relief gave way to a more complex emotional landscape, including grief, anger, and unexpected loneliness. For all their flaws, they had been my family for over a decade. Callista had been my stepdaughter since 16. I'd taught her to drive and helped her pick prom dresses. Leora had been a constant presence since birth, and despite everything, I still loved the sweet child she was underneath the casual entitlement modeled for her. Even Vera, manipulative as she'd proven, had once felt like a mother figure during those early years after marrying Dad. We'd shared holidays and inside jokes and domestic rhythms that made people feel like family. The loss of all that, even though it had been largely illusory, was profound. I made an appointment with Dr. Sarah Chin, a therapist I'd seen briefly after Dad's death, who specialized in family trauma and boundary issues. I needed professional help understanding how I'd allowed myself to become so financially and emotionally enmeshed with people who clearly didn't respect me. It's called financial abuse. Dr. Chin explained during our first session back. It's often combined with emotional manipulation tactics like gaslighting, where your perceptions are systematically undermined until you lose confidence in your own judgment. The term financial abuse felt important. It gave a name to something I'd experienced but couldn't articulate. I hadn't been generous, I'd been exploited. They hadn't been grateful, they'd been entitled. The dynamic hadn't been about family love, it had been about economic control. The fact that they were working to remove you from inheritance while using your money for expenses is particularly telling. Dr. Chen continued. They wanted benefits of your financial support without acknowledging you as a legitimate family member with rights and feelings. She asked me to consider whether I'd been recreating patterns from earlier in life. Had I always been the family member who smoothed conflicts with money and service? Had I learned to earn love through usefulness rather than expecting it as birthright? The questions were uncomfortable but necessary. Yes, I'd always been the responsible one, the problem solver, the person others turned to when they needed something fixed or funded. And yes, I'd learned to measure my worth by utility rather than trusting that people might value me for simply being myself. Recovery from this kind of abuse often involves grieving. Dr. Chen explained, "You're not just losing the people themselves, you're losing the version of those relationships you'd hoped were real. That's a significant loss, even when the people weren't good for you." 3 months later, I was hiking in Rocky Mountain National Park with a group I'd joined through a local outdoor club. The October air was crisp enough to make my breath visible, and the aspen trees were putting on their annual gold show against peaks that never failed to make me feel both small and somehow more substantial. "You seem different," said Marcus, a software engineer I'd been hiking with regularly. "More settled, like you're not carrying something heavy anymore." He was right. The constant background stress of managing family finances and emotions had lifted gradually, leaving space for parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. I was reading more, sleeping better, and actually enjoying social activities instead of constantly calculating their cost. The hiking group had become an unexpected source of genuine community. These were people who appreciated that I organized carpools and researched trail conditions, but who also contributed their own skills without expecting me to handle everything. When someone suggested a weekend camping trip, multiple people volunteered equipment and coordinated meals. When we celebrated a member's birthday, several people contributed to a gift rather than assuming I would handle the entire expense. It was revolutionary, a group dynamic based on mutual respect and shared responsibility rather than one person serving as indefinite financial and emotional caretaker. My relationship with Grandma Jennings had deepened as well. She'd followed through on confronting Vera about the lies and manipulation, and she'd revised her will to protect any inheritance intended for me from family interference. More importantly, we'd begun having regular phone calls that weren't filtered through Vera's version of family dynamics. "You sound happy," she'd said during our most recent conversation. "Really happy, not just putting on a good front. It's been so long since I've heard that in your voice." I'd even started dating someone, a colleague who appreciated my organizational skills, but didn't expect me to manage his entire life. When he paid for dinner, it was because he wanted to, not because he assumed I would if he didn't. When I offered help with a project, He thanked me genuinely and offered reciprocal assistance. Healthy relationships involve reciprocity. Dr. Chen had explained. Both people contribute what they can, both express appreciation, and both take responsibility for their own emotional and financial well being. 6 months after Destin, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. Aunt Tamsin, this is Leora. I got a new phone with my own number. I miss you. I understand now why you had to leave, and I'm sorry about how everyone treated you. I hope you're doing well. I stared at the message before responding. Leora was 17 now, old enough to understand family dynamics with more sophistication than a child could manage. She was also the only family member who had consistently shown me genuine affection without expectations. I wrote back, I miss you too, sweetheart. I'm doing very well, and I hope you are too. You're always welcome to call or text, but I can't be around the family dynamics that were hurting me. I hope you understand. Her response came quickly. I do understand, and I want you to know that I'm paying attention now. I'm not going to let them do to me what they did to you. That message gave me more hope than any apology from the adults ever could have. Leora was learning to recognize manipulation and stand up for herself. She was choosing to maintain a relationship with me, despite family pressure. She was becoming the kind of person who would build healthy relationships rather than repeating destructive patterns. As I stood on the mountain trail, looking out over a vista that stretched for hundreds of miles, I realized that cutting ties with people who treated me badly hadn't made me bitter or isolated. It had freed up space for people who actually valued me for real friendships, authentic family relationships, and the kind of inner peace that comes from knowing your worth isn't dependent on your willingness to be exploited. I wasn't the same person who had arrived in Destin 8 months ago, hoping to bond with family members who saw me as a resource rather than a person. I was someone who understood the difference between generosity and exploitation, between family love and family manipulation, between supporting people you care about and enabling people who refuse to take responsibility for their own lives. The trail ahead curved around a massive boulder formation, disappearing into evergreens that promised new views and challenges. I adjusted my pack and continued walking, no longer carrying the weight of other people's expectations or financial crises. Real love doesn't require you to diminish yourself to prove your worth. Real love doesn't keep score because it doesn't need to. Both people contribute freely and appreciate openly. Real love doesn't require you to pay for your place at the table because your presence is valued for its own sake. Some families inherit peace. Others, like me, learn how to build it with their own two hands on new ground under no one's shadow. And sometimes that's the only kind that truly lasts. They say silence can be cruel, but sometimes it's where you find the clearest truth. Setting boundaries doesn't make you cold, it makes you honest. And if honesty makes others uncomfortable, maybe it's because they've benefited from your silence for too long. Family, in its healthiest form, should be a place where your presence is not just tolerated, but cherished. If that's not the case, it's not betrayal to protect your peace. It's self-respect. Maybe you've been the invisible one at the table. Maybe your kindness has been turned into currency, your silence mistaken for consent. If so, know that you're not alone, and you're not wrong for wanting better. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to stop funding the fantasy and start living your truth. The end.